You walk into a room and the dog that ignores everyone else makes a straight line for you. You sit on a park bench and a toddler you've never met locks eyes with you from across the playground. You're at a friend's house and their cat, the one they insist hates strangers, climbs onto your lap and settles in. People laugh and say things like, "Wow, she never does that," or "Animals just love you." Maybe you laugh along, a little confused because you don't feel like you're doing anything special. But here's what no one really says out loud and what you might not yet have words for. Babies and animals aren't drawn to you randomly. They're responding to something. Not something you're doing, but something you're being. And if this keeps happening to you, if you're the person children stare at in grocery stores and animals gravitate toward without invitation, I want you to stay with me for a few minutes. Because what we're talking about here isn't mystical or sentimental, it's physiological. And it might explain why you've always felt like you're operating on a frequency most people don't consciously register. Here's my promise to you. By the end of this, you'll understand what babies and animals are actually sensing in you, and why that same quality that draws them in can leave you feeling drained or misunderstood around adults. So let's start with the question that actually matters. Not, why do they like me? But what am I giving off that pre-verbal beings can read? Because babies and animals don't have the filters adults do. They haven't learned to override their nervous system. They haven't been trained to mistrust their instincts. When they look at you, they're not seeing your clothes, your role, your status, or your social performance. They're reading your state. And when I say state, I don't mean it in a vague, abstract way. I mean your actual physiological condition, your nervous system signature, the electromagnetic field generated by your heart. Long before language, mammals evolved to detect safety and threat through subtle cues: breath, muscle tone, eye contact, rhythm, and coherence. Babies and animals still live in that world. The first thing they tend to sense in empaths is calm presence without agenda. Most adults enter a space carrying an invisible list of wants. They want approval. They want connection. They want to be seen a certain way. Even when those wants are kind, they create tension. Babies feel it. Animals feel it. It's noise in the nervous system. Empaths, especially those who've learned to self-regulate, often move differently through the world. Not because they're trying to be calm, but because life forced them to become aware, to modulate, to read the room, to not impose. Their nervous system learned often early and often painfully how to stay present without pushing. Picture a family gathering. There's a baby being passed from arm to arm. Everyone is doing what people do. High-pitched voices, exaggerated faces, big energy. The baby tolerates it, maybe even smiles, but their body is slightly tense. Then you sit nearby. You're not trying to engage, you're just there. And the baby turns their head, looks at you, and holds your gaze. Why? Because you're not asking anything of them. Your nervous system isn't broadcasting demand. You're not performing interest or affection. You're regulated, available, and non-intrusive. To a pre-verbal nervous system, that reads as safe. Now take a quiet moment and just notice. When a baby stares at you, do you feel seen in a way that's almost unsettling? As if they're looking through you rather than at you? If so, that isn't imagination. It's recognition. They're responding to something real, something most adults have learned to hide from themselves. What they're sensing is emotional congruence. Babies and animals are exquisitely sensitive to whether your inside matches your outside. Adults learn to smile while angry, laugh while hurting, and say, "I'm fine," when they're anything but. Babies and animals never learn that skill, and they don't trust people who use it. Empaths who've done inner work often have less distance between what they feel and what they show. Not because they overshare, but because they're not fragmenting. Their system isn't running two programs at once, one for the world and one for the self. When a dog approaches you, it isn't sensing kindness as an idea, it's sensing coherence. The energy coming off your body matches what's happening inside your body. And to a nervous system built to detect danger, coherence equals safety. This brings us to another crucial quality they sense in you. You're not a predator. Not in a literal sense, but in an energetic one. Most people carry a subtle, grasping energy. They want the baby to smile. They want the dog to come to them. They want proof of connection. That wanting creates pressure. Babies feel it as demand. Animals feel it as pursuit. Empaths, especially those who've spent years overwhelmed by others' needs, often develop the opposite stance. You've learned not to chase, not to impose, not to need something from every interaction. And that absence of pursuit is exactly what makes you safe to approach. And here's a truth that can be uncomfortable. The same quality that makes animals trust you is often what unsettles adults. Because you're not performing. You're not managing their emotions. You're not adjusting yourself to keep the emotional temperature comfortable. People who rely on those unspoken games don't know what to do with someone who isn't playing. So the dog comes to you. The baby stares, and the adult, sensing something they can't name, feels vaguely uneasy. That's not a flaw in you. It's a reflection of how rare, genuine presence has become. Now let's talk about the third thing babies and animals detect in you, because this one goes deeper than calm or coherence. You notice them as beings, not objects. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Most adults look at a baby and see cute. They look at a dog and see pet. There's affection there, of course, but there's also a subtle objectification. The baby exists to be admired, to smile on cue, to validate the adult's sense of warmth. The dog exists to be played with, touched, entertained. Even love in those moments often carries an unconscious demand. Empaths tend to do something different. You meet their gaze and you recognize consciousness. You don't collapse them into a role. You don't rush to extract a response. You allow them to be who they are in that moment without trying to shape it. And pre-verbal beings feel that immediately. Let me give you another quiet scene. You're sitting in a park. A child, maybe 2 years old, is playing alone near the swings. You glance over and the child is staring at you. Not smiling, not waving, just looking. Most adults would respond by performing delight, big smile, a wave, a silly face, something to do, a silly, but you don't. You hold the gaze gently. Maybe you nod. Maybe there's a small, genuine smile. Maybe there's nothing at all. And the child keeps looking because you didn't rupture the moment with performance. You didn't make it about you. You let them lead. That's what it means to see them as beings. You're not using them to feel good about yourself. You're meeting them where they are. And to a nervous system that hasn't yet learned manipulation or social theater, that feels profoundly respectful. From a Jungian perspective, this is important. Carl Jung spoke often about individuation, about becoming a whole and integrated self rather than a bundle of adapted roles. Babies and animals live entirely from the self, not the persona. They haven't developed a mask. They haven't split themselves to survive socially, so when they encounter someone who is less fragmented, less masked, they recognize it immediately. Your presence resonates with the self, not the persona. And that's why the interaction feels different. This is also why these encounters can feel strangely intimate. When a baby looks at you and you feel almost exposed, it's because there's no psychological armor on either side. There's no script. No manipulation, no performance, just two nervous systems meeting honestly. Now here's where this connects to your life in a more painful way. If animals and babies are consistently drawn to you, it often means your nervous system learned safety the hard way. Many empaths didn't become regulated because life was gentle. They became regulated because they had to. They learned to read subtle cues, to stay quiet, to stay aware, to not escalate situations. Over time, that adaptation matured into a capacity for deep presence. But adaptations come with a cost. Around adults, especially adults who are heavily identified with their persona, Your non-performing presence can be confusing or even threatening. You're not mirroring their energy. You're not giving constant feedback. You're not reassuring them through exaggerated emotion. And instead of interpreting that as groundedness, they often interpret it as distance, coldness, or intensity. This is where many empaths start doubting themselves. They think, why do children and animals feel safe with me, but adults don't? And the answer isn't that something is wrong with you. It's that adults are often disconnected from the very signals babies and animals still trust. Another layer here is projection. Jung taught that when people encounter qualities in others that they've disowned in themselves, they often react unconsciously. Your calm, coherent presence can activate discomfort in someone who lives in constant internal noise. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because your nervous system is reflecting something they've lost touch with, so they feel unsettled. They may call you hard to read, too quiet, or intense. Meanwhile, the beings who cannot lie with their bodies respond to you with ease. There's also something else babies and animals sense: your respect for boundaries. You don't rush into their space. You don't grab, demand, or invade. You allow approach rather than forcing contact. In trauma-informed language, you're offering choice. And choice is the foundation of safety. To a baby, that means, I'm not going to overwhelm you. To an animal, it means, I'm not going to control you. To a nervous system shaped by millions of years of survival, that is everything. So if you've ever wondered why a cat chooses your lap over everyone else's, or why a baby calms when you hold them without effort, it's not because you're special in a performative sense. It's because you're congruent, you're regulated, you're respectful, you're present. And those qualities don't shout, they don't demand attention, they simply register. The difficult truth is that this way of being often leaves you tired around adults. Adults expect engagement, reaction, reassurance, emotional labor. When you don't provide it automatically, they feel the gap and assume you're withholding something. But you're not withholding, you're just not pretending. And that difference is exactly what preverbal beings trust. So what does all of this actually mean for you? If babies and animals are consistently drawn to you, it's not a coincidence and it's not a personality quirk. It's evidence that your nervous system is communicating safety. And that's not something you learn from a book. It's something that's cultivated over time, usually through experience, adaptation, and inner work. From a Jungian lens, this is about integration. When the psyche is fragmented, when different parts of the self are split off and hidden behind a persona, the body carries tension. The nervous system becomes inconsistent. One part of you says, I'm fine, while another is bracing, defending, or performing. Babies and animals detect that inconsistency immediately. But when someone has done the work of bringing those split-off parts back into awareness, when feeling, thought, and presence are aligned, the system becomes coherent. Jung would call this movement toward the self. And the self, unlike the persona, doesn't need to prove anything. That's why your presence feels different. It's also why this quality can feel invisible or even unappreciated in adult relationships. Adults are trained to relate through roles. They expect certain signals, enthusiasm, reassurance, mirroring, emotional cues that confirm, we're okay. When you don't automatically provide those signals because your regulation doesn't depend on performance, they may feel uncertain around you. And uncertainty makes many people uncomfortable. This often puts empaths in a strange position. The beings who cannot lie, who cannot manipulate, who have no persona, trust you immediately. And the beings who have learned to survive through masks, strategies, and emotional control often don't know how to place you. That can be lonely. You may have spent years feeling like you don't quite fit, like you're slightly out of sync with the social world. Not because you lack warmth, but because you don't force it. Not because you're distant, but because you're real. And here's the part that matters most. Your sensitivity is not just about feeling more. It's about being more present, more congruent, less split, less defended. Babies and animals are drawn to that because their survival depends on correctly reading who is safe. They are not impressed by charm. They are not persuaded by words. They respond to regulation, coherence, and respect. In other words, they are reading you accurately. So when a child stares at you with that quiet, unwavering gaze, or when an animal crosses a room just to sit near you, don't dismiss it. Don't explain it away. Don't reduce it to chance. Let it be evidence. Evidence that despite whatever you've endured, despite whatever adaptations you had to make, your system did not close. You did not harden completely. You did not lose your capacity to be present without armor. That matters more than most achievements people chase. In Jungian terms, this is a sign that the ego is not dominating the whole psyche. The self is still alive and accessible. And that's rare, especially in a world that rewards performance over presence. There's another quiet truth here. Many empaths spend their lives looking for connection in the wrong places. They try to be understood by people who are deeply disconnected from themselves. They exhaust themselves explaining, adapting, and softening, hoping to be met. But the connection you're actually wired for doesn't come from performance. It comes from mutual presence. That's why moments with babies and animals feel so grounding. There's no agenda, no hierarchy, no transaction, just being. And perhaps that's the invitation for you. Not to try harder to fit into spaces that require fragmentation, but to honor the quality you already carry. To seek relationships, environments, and rhythms that don't demand you abandon your coherence. The world doesn't need more polished personas, it needs nervous systems that remember how to be safe. Yours does. So the next time someone says animals just love you, or she never does that with anyone else, you don't need to correct them. But internally, you can recognize what's really being named. Your system is saying, well, I'm still here, I'm still real, I still know how to be present. And the ones who never forgot how to listen are responding. They already knew. Now so do you.